Let's now give you the world news. Mali's government has announced a ban on aid groups that are funded by France. It's seen as the latest attempt by the leader of the military coup to distance the West African country from its one-time colonizer and former ally in the fight against Islamic extremism. But the move immediately raises fears for the hundreds of thousands of people in Mali currently receiving aid. The number of banned organisations is not yet clear, but it's believed to affect dozens, including many Malian associations. They include groups providing emergency food aid and medical services, as well as those helping with water supply and agricultural issues. Let's get some analysis. Michael Shurkin joins us from 14 North Strategies. Michael, thanks for being with us. Why is this happening now?
It's happening now because the junta keeps trying to play to populist politics in Mali. Basically, it's much easier to try to demonstrate to the Malian people that it's doing something that a lot of Malians think is really a priority for them, which is basically demonstrating Mali's independence vis-a-vis France, demonstrating its sovereignty, asserting its sovereignty. It's really regrettable because I think that this is a clear act of cutting off one's nose to spite one's face. It's sort of for the sake of demonstrating independence. What the junta is doing is basically hurting its own country and hurting its people. As you said, it's not clear exactly how many people will be affected by this, but given the conditions in Mali and how bad the situation is for a lot of Malians, it's safe to assume that every little bit of aid is helpful, and it's hard to imagine justifying doing without aid when they need all the aid that they can get.
Who stands to gain from this move?
The Malian junta stands to gain just because this is very popular in the eyes of many Malians and a lot of other people in the region. There's this sort of the way a lot of Malians frame this is that they understand that they don't think that that France has been an ally against jihadism. And in fact, in the press statement put out by the Malian government, they accused France of doing aid that's purpose was to dehumanize Malians, and also they accused France once again of actively supporting Islamic terrorists in the country. And it's an absurd accusation that they've never been able to provide evidence of. But this is what a lot of people think. And so for Malians who view the situation in that way, this is really very satisfying. So it's politically very satisfying for a lot of Malians. So that's who gains, really.
It suits an agenda. It suits a certain narrative. Is there a role being played by Russia at the heart of all this?
I would not exaggerate the Russian role. The Russians, I think, are very good at sort of aggravating things and maybe stoking up anti-French sentiment, but the anti-French sentiment was already there and has much larger roots. And I would urge French listeners not to blame Russia for this or blame Russia for a lot. Russians take advantage of the situation, and I think ultimately French need to look at their own conduct in Mali, and the Malian government also needs to look. This is between Mali and France, and I would say that the Russians are just sort of spectators who are eating popcorn and enjoying the show and thinking about how that they could take advantage of all of this.
I'm pocketing something like, is it $10 million a month for the hiring of mercenaries to fulfill the role that once was fulfilled by France for free?
Yes. So part of this theory is that the French military was not only not helpful, but actually was actively helping the Islamists. Again, this is absurd, but the feeling is that there's much to be gained by kicking the French out, and then also by turning to the Russians, the idea being that somehow Russians are going to do differently. They'll do better and they'll be more effective. I don't think this is the case, but the Russians are effective in some ways, and arguably they deal with the Malian military and they do certain things that are different from the French and possibly better in terms of certain kinds of information sharing. At least this is what Malians tell me, well-informed Malians. But by and large, you can safely assume that 1,000 Russian mercenaries cannot have the same effect on the ground as almost 5,000 French troops backed by the French Air Force. It's sort of an absurd exchange.
So the mercenaries, on the one hand, the information or influence campaign via the internet, via social media and all the usual platforms, again, another Russian tool that's being used there. Hear what you're saying completely about perhaps looking more at France's role in Mali historically and how things have always been, rather than throwing all the blame on Russia. Can I just move away from that and talk about people, ordinary people? Because they're the people who stand to really be hurt by this, aren't they? The people who need help.
Yes, I think that's true. Yes, likewise, a lot of people in Mali, I think, are hurt by the departure of French forces. This is particularly true in eastern Mali, where the insecurity is getting worse and worse and worse, and the Malian government is powerless to do anything about it. And that's precisely where the French military had been the most active. And in terms of people who need the aid, that they're the ones who are being hurt by this. And there's no plan to substitute for that aid. And I don't think there's some notion that the Russians are going to be able to step in and provide a replacement. I've not heard that such a plan is in the works, and at any rate, it just sort of seems like if that's what Malians are expecting, that seems like a very foolhardy expectation to have. It's not clear to me whether or not the Malian junta is reading the world news also and is aware of what's going on in Ukraine and aware of how badly Wagner and the Russians are being mauled, and that Wagner has no more resources to provide Mali, even if they asked, even if Wagner wanted to, because they're being decimated in Ukraine. I'm not sure if the Malian government really, if they understand that there's a real limit to the amount of aid that Russia could provide, even if Russia intended to do so.
Michael Shurkin of 14 North Strategies, analyst, with that insight into what's happening in Mali. Thank you so very much indeed for joining us. We appreciate your time, and we appreciate your clear-sighted analysis of what the situation is on the ground there. We, of course, will be talking to more people to get more on this story throughout the programme.